Welcome to Worth Quoting, which is presented by the Florida Junior College Women's Center. I'm Jane Rothschild, and with us today is Canadian writer Margaret Atwood, whose more than 20 books include novels, poems, essays, and short stories. Margaret Atwood is a political activist, and she's president of Canadian PEN, which is an international writers' organization. She's president of the English-speaking division of Canadian PEN. She's also a mother, and her current novel, The Handmaid's Tale, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for 11 weeks. It has been labeled a dystopia. It is set in the future. It's a right-wing religious patriarchy where the women are, for the most part, brainwashed slaves. And I want to lead off with asking Margaret, is that your vision of the future?
I wouldn't call them exactly brainwashed slaves. Let's just say that history has been somewhat reversed. There's nothing in this book that hasn't happened already or isn't happening elsewhere for which we don't have the technology. So let us just say that circumstances are a little more stringent for them than they are for us. Is this my vision of the future? Not inevitably. It's not an inevitable version of the future. But you will notice that a number of countries, for instance Iran, have been reverting rather than proceeding towards what we used to think the future would be like. You know, they're not going towards unisexual clothing and you know, silver knee boots and things.
When you say nothing has happened in the novel that hasn't already happened, what are some examples? What are you referring to?
Well, let's just take clothing, which I always like to talk about. The female knee did not emerge from under the skirt until the 1920s. Before that, there were centuries and centuries. This is in Western European civilization. There were many, many centuries during which it was considered very immodest to display your knees or even your ankles in public. Now, let alone your bare arms. I mean, all of these parts were always covered up. So my clothing in The Handmaid's Tale, it has one useful feature. It's color-coded, so that you can tell by what color people are wearing, what their position in life is, and you would never make the mistake of saying to a woman, are you the woman of the house, and then find out that she wasn't.
Is your color-coded system based on something historical, or did you just make that up?
Oh, no, I never just make things up out of nothing. The wives wear blue, which in Western European civilization is considered a pure color of the Virgin Mary, for instance. Unmarried girls wear white, which is pretty obvious. Widows wear black, obvious again. Servants wear green. They're called Marthas out of the New Testament. And the handmaids of the tale wear red, which in Western European society, unlike China, is considered the color of passion. But it's also quite visible, and one of the reasons they wear red is so that they can't run away too easily. But there's another category of women called econo-wives. They're the wives of the poorer men, and they have to incorporate all these functions. They have to be the servants and the wives and have the children all in one. And they wear stripes. My dress has no significance today.
Why do you think The Handmaid's Tale it's more mainstreamed, I think, than your other novels? It's certainly enjoying a lot of success.
You mean it sold more?
It's sold more. It's on the bestseller list
Yeah.
for longer. And why do you think that is?
Peculiar, isn't it? Because as a conception, you would think it's the wackiest of the bunch, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I mean, just if I told you the plot and you hadn't read it, wouldn't you say this is pretty bizarre, and this is certainly not the kind of book that's going to hit the New York Times bestseller list?
It's quite a departure from your other work, too.
Somewhat, yes. It's not about contemporary life, exactly, although it sort of is, because the past of the women in the book is our present. The things they remember with nostalgia are things we take for granted, such as jogging shoes and putting your own money in the laundromat, which they can't do anymore because they're not allowed to control money at all. So why did it hit the list? Well, I think it's partly timing that some people do not consider this a totally implausible wacko scenario for the future. The book started selling strongly in Texas and Southern California before it started selling strongly in New York. And I think one of the reasons for that was that such a form of government, such a society, did not seem too far away to people who live in those places. And I don't know whether you've been following the lead up to the election that you're going to have shortly, but it would not at all surprise me if Pat Robertson would come from behind and capture the Republican nomination, in which case you might see some quite Ayatollah Khomeini activities going on here, of course, in a different mode. But
so then it's encouraging, certainly politically, that your book is more mainstreamed, because you were always widely read among women poets and women interested in writing and literary women, but this is a more mainstream kind of popularity.
Well, it's encouraging and discouraging. Let us say that if there weren't anything to be frightened of, the book might well have just had a modest literary sale, so I'm not sure that I'm all that pleased about it.
So I read somewhere that you said that you think that the society, the Republic of Gilead, which is the name of the society in The Handmaid's Tale, is a logical conclusion to where we are now. And
well, it's the logical working out of certain statements that get bandied about rather lightly these days, without people thinking through the implications.
Were you frightened when you were writing this book?
Oh, I'm terrified all the time. I'm one of those people who has to make a major decision about crossing the street, but you can't let that interfere with your life. It's a working out of statements like, a woman's place is in the home. Now, if a woman's place really were in the home, number one, you and I would not be here. Number two, neither would any of these people. Number three, you wouldn't even have women on television saying a woman's place is in the home, because they would be in the home. Now, Iran takes this seriously. They don't let women on television even to say a woman's place is in the home. There are no women on television. So you also have to ask yourself, if women's place really is in the home and somebody's deciding to put this into effect, what are the steps that would have to be gone through in view of the fact that there's all these women out there running around loose, not in their homes? How do you get them back in there and make them stay there? Well, first of all, you'd have to refuse them jobs, make it illegal for them to have jobs. You would have to take away any control they would have over money. And you'd have to ban street prostitution, so they couldn't be on the street either. And the only place left for them to be would be in the home.
I found myself really being grateful for all the contradictions and neuroses in my life today as I read Handmaid's Tale.
You mean
I
it
said,
could
"Gee,
be
it's
worse?"
not so bad." But do you really think...
I like to bring a little joy into people's lives.
Do you really think that someone like a Pat Robertson would indulge in polygamy and having sex whenever he wanted it, and
that
encouraging...
isn't exactly what goes on in The Handmaid's Tale. In fact, it's a very puritanical kind of society.
Well, there's a part where the commander says to the heroine, I'm sorry for people who haven't read it, but you just should, but he says that the most painful thing for men now, because they can get sex whenever they want it, the most painful thing for men now is their inability to feel.
No, that was in the past, namely our present. He said, look what was wrong with the world. Men, for instance, everything was too easy for them. And now things are better because we have rearranged society. No, they can't get sex whenever they want it. Things are much more arranged than that. In fact, life for men is not too keen in the Republic of Gilead. Number one, they don't have girlfriends or female friends. No dating before marriage. Marriages are arranged by the regime. When the regime says you get married, not when you may wish to. There's no divorce. For starters, no skin mags, no porny flicks, no women on television at all, and no women in movies. what do they do in the evenings? Well, I don't know, because I was writing the book from a point of view of a woman, but there's also no homosexuality. It's a hanging offense. That's another statement I take seriously that people kind of wave around these days. And that is the way it is. Compulsory military service, because of course a civil war is going on. I'm far from thinking that everybody in the United States would love and acquiesce in such a regime, including a lot of men. In my book, there are men in the underground, and there are men fighting it out in the hills, including Southern Baptists, who would not go for the polygamy.
So there are a lot of people, Mary McCarthy among them, who would say that you just took one small part of society and generated this large vision.
Not so small anymore. In a country in which the voting rate in a good year is 50%, I think you better rethink that word small. What that means is that 26% of the voters can control the government if organized. And let me remind you that Pat Robertson has a lot of television stations. A lot of people watch those shows.
It's true. It's true.
Let us say that it's big enough so that I think you might have a ground base, if the person doing the rhetoric did it right, for putting in such a regime initially. Then they could bring in the polygamy and stuff afterwards. They didn't hit the populace with that right away. In fact, they kept it rather quiet right away. The reason they have polygamy, by the way, and it's not legal polygamy. As I say, there's no divorce, and it is legally monogamous. It's because the birth rate has gone way down, the Caucasian birth rate. That's happening now. The fertility and infertility, the infertility and sterility rates are going up, and so is the birth defect rate. And when that is projected far enough, it puts the kind of pressure on a society that makes a state or a regime or a government have to think quite carefully about how to either increase the birth rate or beef up the numbers through immigration. Otherwise, population figures just go way down. I don't know whether you know about Romania right now. Their birth rate was going way down. They've brought in some pretty stringent legislation. No birth control of any kind, no abortions. And compulsory pregnancy tests for women in that age category. If you test positive 1 month and negative the next, you have to prove you didn't do it on purpose. Wages and promotions pegged to the number of children you have. That's twisting the old arm.
Were you angry when you were writing this book? I mean, were your motivations different from your other novels in that they were
angry?
Well, socially, the book seemed to me it's much more political to me. It seemed than your other novels. In your other novels, it seemed to me there was always one sort of radical character, usually a man, more political than the heroine, let's say.
I think it's the kind of book. Well, it's a kind of book that it's always interested me to read. This is a tradition that goes way back to Plato and the Book of Revelations. It's the tradition of utopias, or the planning of perfect societies. In the 20th century, we tend to reverse that because we've seen a couple of perfect society plans put into effect and they didn't work out too well. You know, Stalinist Russia and Nazi Germany are not really anybody's idea of how they think life should be led, I hope. So we tend, instead of doing perfect societies, we tend to do the reverse of that. But it's a long, long tradition. It's always interested me. I've read a lot of them. And it struck me, for one thing, that not many of them had been written by women, for obvious reasons. Women only recently have begun to write anything, and only recently have they begun to write this kind of book. But I thought that would be interesting.
It just seems to me it would be hard for a writer to hold inside her head the globalness of politics, the reality. You're reading the newspaper, you're clipping, you're getting your motivation, a lot of it from a certain kind of reality, and then process it and then turn it into a beautifully written book like this. And I guess that's why I asked if you were angry or in fear.
Not exactly. No, I think curious, possibly. It's wrong to be too angry when you're writing because it distorts things. I think your anger has to be controlled in a way, otherwise it sort of takes over the book. Let me say, however, that I have done quite a bit of traveling, and two of the countries that I have been to were Afghanistan before the recent troubles, in fact, just before, and Iran 8 months before the overthrow of the Shah. And that was very, very interesting, particularly Afghanistan. It gives you a different way of looking at women and how their lives are led. And part of the Handmaid's Tale stuff came from that experience, because nobody hassles Afghani Muslim women on the street. Nobody whistles at them. They can't see them at all. They're all covered up. They have little windows covered with netting to see out through. There are some pluses, probably nothing you would want to trade, but
there's no women's movement there, I take it.
Oh no, not at all. Women don't have jobs there at all. Or didn't then. They probably do now. The Soviets have probably put that in, but at that time they did not.
Just a more general question. Which is your most personal novel?
Personal? I don't really write autobiography, except I've got two personal short stories. Will that do?
Sure.
I have a book coming out in the States called Bluebeard's Egg in October. And the first story in that book and the last story are about my real parents the way they really are. And I think the reason I wrote that was that I got tired of having people ask me, too bad your parents died. You know, they thought from surfacing that they would be dead. Or some of the other books have rather awful parents, which are in fact not mine, and so they start in on, well, I guess your relationship with your parents was pretty bad. In fact, it wasn't. My parents are very nice. So they were, however, too nice to be used for a novel. You have to use other people's parents for that. But
these are short stories, not essays.
They're short stories, yeah. So those are autobiographical. And the one thing I can say about autobiography is that none of the physical details in my books are made up. If I write about a locale, it's pretty much the way it is. I sometimes, make up names of stores and things like that, but the terrain, the kinds of physical things that are observed, I have to be in a place before I can write about it.
So you travel and then you go home to your writing room and work there?
Well, I'm not that well organized. That's a little bit too deliberate sounding. I can spend a lot of time in a place and never write about it at all because it doesn't connect with me. I lived for a year in Scotland. I've never written anything about it.
Did you go to Scotland to write? Or
no, to finish no, Graham was going. So I went too, but I was working on a book, which was Life Before Man. And I finished it in Scotland, despite the worst case of bronchitis I've ever had. I was caught in a rainstorm that even the Scots were running out of, so you can imagine it was bad.
Do we have some questions from our audience?
I want to know what the reaction's been to your book. And you say some things are taken personally. What have the reactions been to the book, both positive and negative?
To The Handmaid's Tale?
Handmaid's Tale.
Well, you would think that born-agains would emerge from under the rug and denounce me, wouldn't you? Hasn't happened at all. Probably either because they don't read that kind of book or because nobody, no matter how right-wing they may think they are in this country, is that right-wing. And particularly, you would think they would not go for the biblically based polygamy, which it is biblically based. It's based on Genesis 30, chapters 1 to 13, which is the story of Rachel and Leah and Jacob and the two handmaids. The whole 5 of them produced the 12 tribes of Israel. Not 2 of them and not 3 of them, but 5. So even though there is a biblical basis for polygamy, which the Mormons knew full well in the 19th century, nobody has really emerged as the champion of it, to my knowledge. the adverse reactions have not been numerous. The reviews were amazingly good, particularly in the States. In Canada, people were saying, could it happen here? In Britain, they treated it as a cracking good yarn. And in the States, they weren't saying, could it happen here? They were saying, when is it going to happen, and how can we stop it? How much time have we got? So it's a different feeling.
Any other questions?
I was very interested and touched by Offred's scene with the commander where he wanted to play Scrabble and he wanted her to kiss him as if she really meant it. I was so touched by his needing communication, needing words. I wondered if you would comment on that, how the loss of language to these women and to the men was perhaps...
Well, why would we think that men in such a society would not have nostalgia too? Even though they might have felt that they were improving things, once they had, in quotes, improved them, do you not think that it might occur to them that they might miss a few things? One of them being able to just spend time with a woman that wasn't directed time, that wasn't sort of programmed time. And so he gets together with her in that scene, not for sort of dirty sex as she has been expecting, but to do the kind of companionable thing that is no longer possible in that society between men and women. And as for, kiss me as if you really meant it, that's pure sort of first date in the 50s nostalgia. And men would not be without that. The idea that men are not human beings has always seemed to me rather odd, just as odd as the idea that women are not human beings.
It was a wonderful touch, which I thought...
If I were the Scrabble company, I'd print it on the outside of the box. It's the first time you've ever seen Scrabble described as an erotic game.
I like the blue and white dish towel, too.
You stated that you were very surprised that Southern Baptists did not rally and I guess against your book. Is part of the reason why you wrote the book or part of your motivation because of a lot of the zealotry that's going on now in Islamic jihad and a lot of the fundamentalist Christian things that are going on in the East and in this country?
I would say certainly so. I would also say that Southern Baptists by now are rather conservative as such things go. So that in my book I have the Southern Baptists as part of the guerrilla movement. They're fighting it out in the hills against the regime, as the Quakers are, for instance. The Quakers would do what the Quakers always do. They're running the underground female road up to Canada, smuggling women out of the country. And the Catholics are in trouble under this regime, and nuns, for instance, are being forced out of their vocation and being forced to have children if they are fertile. And there are a lot of religious groups that are with us now that this regime would eliminate or persecute, because one of the things such regimes always do is they try to consolidate their power by bumping off anybody who is fairly close to them and could pose a challenge. So just as the Russian Revolution, everybody got together to overthrow the Romanovs, and then there was an internal war. There was a power struggle, and the Mensheviks had to go, and then the old Bolsheviks were purged under Stalin. Why would we think it would be any different? I think the Southern Baptists would become a persecuted group under this regime.
I'm sorry, I haven't read the book yet. I certainly will. It sounds very interesting, but what happened to racism? Is there...
Oh, it's a big racist society. Part of the impulse for the society comes from what we call demographic anxiety. It's the Caucasian birth rate that's going down in the States. So that would, of course, generate some demographic anxiety, you know, of the we're being taken over kind. And this is definitely a racist regime. They have set up national homelands in the Dakotas, and they are shipping people to them. In fact, we see that Detroit is in flames. It is resisting. The military policy towards the big cities in this regime is what I call the Warsaw encirclement tactic. They encircle them and starve them out, and so yes, it would definitely be racist. But I see, you know, as you probably do yourself, that some of the rhetoric in some of those kinds of fanatical movements is racist.
Yes.
And if you think the Bible can't be used to justify that, boy, take a look at South Africa.
Well, it's the same thing with the Holy Quran.
Yeah, sure. You can find chapter and verse in the Old Testament. It's always the Old Testament that these people get their goodies out of. The Golden Rule, the Sermon on the Mount, and things are usually fairly small potatoes, or else they're overshadowed by some of the blood and thunder stuff out of the Old Testament, which makes me question, you know, exactly how Christian are some of the people who say that they are. I mean, I was brought up in one of those nice Sunday schools in which you were supposed to love people and all that old-fashioned stuff.
Do you spend a certain amount of time researching and then cut yourself off and begin writing, or does your research continue?
Well, I usually research while I write, because I don't usually know until I get into the book exactly what it is that I need to know. I kept a large clipping file while I was writing the book, but I didn't start it before.
But when you were in Iran and Afghanistan, did you just naturally
I
keep a
had
journal?
no idea I was going to be writing about this
Did
stuff.
you keep a journal anyway because that's what you do?
Filing system in
Really?
the head. No, I don't keep a journal. I tried, but I found it too difficult.
We're almost out of time, but I have this crazy question. I just want to know if you have any favorite Southern writers or what you think of Southern women writers.
Well, I would say that the big influence on, if you have to pick out one area of American literature that has been influential in Canadian literature, it has been Southern literature. And I think the reason for that is twofold. One, Canada was very rural until very recently, so that the small town experience and the rural experience are something that both writers share in common. Number two, they both were taught to think of themselves as cultural backwaters. And number three, they've both experienced colonialism. And the South is the only area of the states that really ever had that experience in recent times.
Specific Southern writers?
Faulkner is the biggie, but, you know, Flannery O'Connor and Eudora Welty for women, for sure, and Carson McCullers.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Margaret Atwood very much for being with us today on Worth Quoting, which is presented by the Florida Junior College Women's Center. And I hope you'll all read her book, which is called The Handmaid's Tale. And thank you for watching.